I wasn't sure. There was a lot of voices, a lot of people speaking to me saying that that's what I should do. I spent a lot of time learning different languages in my divinity degree. So, like, read and write in Greek and then also Hebrew as well. I always thought there would be like a lot of overlap between that and just natural language processing.
What was the process of landing a job like for you?
We're sending resumes for about a year and a half to 2 years. I sent so many, maybe like 600 or so, and like I was also taking every cover letter and tailoring it to every specific job. A lot of that took a lot of time, and I only got about like 3 responses back. It was pretty tough. It was either I was going to continue to try to throw everything I can at it and without like a proper plan, or pivot and try to do something else.
You'd ask me, are data science YouTubers, are they dishonest in their advice sometimes? Do you want to give some context for a question like that?
Well,
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Immanuel Tacky. So Immanuel is a data scientist at Canadian Tire Corporation, where he focuses specifically on recommender systems. Immanuel actually reached out to me a couple of years ago about getting into data science, and we had a conversation back then. And he now comes into this interview as someone who's gone through the whole journey of landing a data science job, starting from the very beginning. So Emmanuel's story is particularly interesting because he was really struggling with landing that first job, and he opted to go the master's route to land his first position. He did have success in that path, and today we're going to talk a little bit about why a master's degree might be a good idea for you, why it might not be a good idea for other people, and we'll navigate how he made those decisions going forward. We'll also talk about his experience landing his first job and a bit about how information can be confusing coming from multiple different YouTube content creators or on different places in the internet. This is a really interesting conversation. I enjoyed speaking with Immanuel, and I think you'll like listening to this as well. Hope you enjoy. Immanuel, welcome to the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. You reached out to me on LinkedIn, I think like 3-4 years ago, and then more recently just reached back out and told me that you landed a data science job. And so I thought that was an awesome opportunity to have you on the show to talk about your journey and your experience. And again, thank you so much for coming on.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So something that I ask every guest to start out with is, how did you first get interested in data? And, then from that point, how did you end up navigating the market into eventually getting a job?
Right. So in terms of how I first got interested into data, so I actually got introduced to it like almost 10 years ago. So there was a guy my father introduced me to when I was still in undergrad, and I was trying to figure out like what I wanted to do in the tech space. And he was actually like, I think he was this like a CTO at HP, and he retired a couple of years afterward. But he mentioned that big data was like the next big thing that a lot of people I should potentially consider. And so I looked into it, but at the time I didn't fully understand the space. So I thought it was very interesting, but like since I didn't really know how to navigate it, I just kind of left it and then continued with the more IT oriented path that I was going on. And so as I was doing IT for a while, I started to realize that it wasn't something I was really that passionate about, and I wanted to pivot into something else. Originally, I wanted to do something that was more like uh, within the computer science realm, and so like I was looking at spaces or careers that were at least adjacent to it or within that space, and data science was one that came up. And then it kind of rang a bell because I was introduced to it before, but I didn't fully understand it back then because I was a bit more naive and I guess adolescent in my understanding of certain things. But
Interesting.
so yeah, so then it kind of like clicked. I'm like, this might actually just be the space that I want to work in. So I ended up going to like a career fair, and then there was a guy who was talking about data science. I'm just like, oh wow, that's exactly what I've been trying to get into. So He gave me like a seminar on like just how data science works and then what they do and what their program is like. And then I was pretty much sold in terms of like just all the types of problems we get to work on, career opportunities, etc. And so I enrolled into like a 4 to 6 month program, and that's pretty much how I built a lot of my skill sets in terms of just like getting a more rounded out skill set in the data science space in terms of like building out models, learning how to create various types of data analytics, and even like working with things like SAS, et cetera, et cetera. So after that, I was pretty much just sold 100% in, and I started looking for roles, and that's pretty much how I started. But then there's the whole looking for roles part, which took a while. So I'm not sure if you wanted me to get into that part next, but
Well, before we dive into that, I'm interested. You studied something fairly unique in college, which is divinity. I was wondering if you could tell me about that. It seems a little bit far away from data science and AI, but I'm always interested in the background and story of how you go from studying two fairly disparate domains.
right. So like first I studied IT management, and that was like my first degree. My second degree was the Divinity degree, and that was more so because so growing up, like my parents they're actually pastors, and so they have a church, and so coming from that background, there is a lot of pressure to take your parents' uh, job basically. And so it was something that's always been at the back of my mind. And there's also been like that subtle pressure to kind of, eventually, I don't know, potentially be the next pastor for our church. But um, I wasn't sure. There was a lot of voices, a lot of people speaking to me saying that that's what I should do. I wasn't sure. I wanted to find out. I felt like there was a lot of information and knowledge in that area that could be interesting. So I decided that hey, like since I wasn't really doing a whole lot outside of just working, I might as well take that on while I'm working at the same time, and just try to see what I can learn in terms of like understanding the history, a lot of the philosophical contexts, and a bunch of other things that the area had to offer. So it was really interesting, really insightful. I think I learned a lot of interesting skill sets, and yeah, I at the end, I mean, it made me realize that I'm not sure. I didn't think that being a pastor was for me, but at least I knew, right? Because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life kind of like trying to figure out if that's something what I wanted to do. So I felt like that was the
Oh,
best way.
I really admire that decision making process of saying, "Hey, I want to try. We're going to try this out, and we'll see if it was either meant to be or not meant to be."
Hmm.
I I had a somewhat similar experience where my dream was to play professional golf, and I tried it. I wasn't quite good enough, but I at least gave it a shot. I looked at it and said, "Hey, was this something that I could see my entire life doing? Is the opportunity cost of me doing this taking away from me doing other things?" And there's so many friends that I have where they didn't try, and they look back and say, "Oh, uh, should I do it now? It's a lost opportunity. What if I had done it?" And you at least know that, hey, I gave it a shot, and I can move on. And that to me is a pretty powerful thing. There's for both of us maybe lower effort ways to figure that out, but at the same time, I really admire that you went through and you took the hands-on approach, experimentation, to determine if it was something you wanted to pursue, rather than the other way around, rather than leaving questions unanswered. Um, let's dive back into the career path. And you'd mentioned there was sort of a long uphill battle for you to land the first data science job after. I guess it was a boot camp, or technically. What was the process of landing a job like for you?
It was very difficult. So like after I did the boot camp, so there were some opportunities through the boot camp to uh like send your resumes to employers and potentially get interviews. So that was done with a lot of the candidates. So some of the candidates did actually get roles from the boot camp. I was one of the only ones who didn't, who was like considered a high performing student from the program, and so that's when I started to realize that, hey, maybe a degree might, because the difference between me and them is that they all had quantitative degrees. Like some had degrees in physics or business analytics, and I had pretty much a divinity degree. So it's just like it's very different, right? so
Yeah. Were those were advanced degrees or those were just undergraduate degrees?
they're master's level degrees. And yeah, so like yeah, that was the biggest difference I saw. But I put it to the side and said, hey, I still think I could get the role, get a role in the data science space by just continuing to do the self learning route. And so I continued to do that. Did courses online. Also tried to apply that to my resume. We're sending resumes for about a year and a half to 2 years. um, I sent so many, maybe like 600 or so. And like I was also taking every cover letter and tailoring it to every specific job um, posting. And so like a lot of that took a lot of time. And I only got about like three responses back. And so like it was pretty tough, like mentally, just having a goal and not being able to see any results from that. And so it was either I was going to continue to try to throw everything I can at it and without like a proper plan, or pivot and try to do something else. And so there was also some advice I got from one of your videos where you mentioned that uh, there like you can do the self-learning route, but like you also felt like for you it would make more sense to have like a more structured approach to learning. And I felt like maybe for me that would benefit, because I also realized there was a lot of gaps in terms of what I understood in the data science space. And so I felt like maybe that even might be an impediment to me being effective. And so from there, I was just like, you know what, maybe I do need to get another degree. Sure, I'm going to have 3 degrees, but I mean, it's better than, I'm not being able to get into the role or career path that I want, and just doing things haphazardly. So I started looking into some computer science degrees first. I was told I wasn't qualified for any of them because of my background. So I had to find something that was kind of like in the middle ground. So I ended up finding like a tech MBA type program at Queen's University in Canada. And so it was a Master of Management in Artificial Intelligence. So it was like half business, and then half artificial intelligence and just the whole data science domain. And so I ended up applying to that. I got accepted, enrolled, and then from there I was able to utilize the connections through Queen's University to get internship actually at my current employer, Canadian Tire Corporation in Canada. And so I was able to get the interview, did well on the interviews. Then I got the internship. Eventually, I performed well on the internship. And then that led to me getting a full time role. And so that's my whole process in terms of being able to break in. And it's also about sometimes the connections as well. If I had not gone the university route, I would have never been able to get access to some of those specific roles that are meant for people who are just trying to break into the industry. So.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And so, something I'm interested in when you were applying to those 600, sending those 600 applications in. What types of roles were you applying to? Were they mostly just pure data science? Were they data engineering? What was the mix looking like during that period?
The mix was, I mean, like first when I started off, it was just all data scientist roles, right? Because I didn't want anything else. But then eventually, when I wasn't getting the results I wanted, I also started applying for data analyst roles, because I felt like I could start off as a data analyst and then after maybe work my way to more of a data scientist oriented role. So like it ended up being a mix between those two.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions.
Z is specifically made for high-performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z8 workstation. I really love that the Z workstations can come standard with Linux or WSL2, and they can be configured with the Data Science Software Stack Manager. With the Software Stack Manager, you can get right to the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show.
The path you chose seems very logical for you. It makes a ton of sense. And I think historically, I've probably been a little bit harsh on master's programs. Obviously, I do have a master's degree in computer science.
Yeah.
But for better or for worse, there are advantages and benefits to master's degrees. I think the biggest drawback, probably less so in Canada, is the cost for going to school, especially in the U.S. I think the cost of school is exorbitant and unbelievably inefficient. A lot of the programs are kind of cash grabs, but if you're looking globally, that is different. A lot of places in Europe, school is relatively inexpensive, if not like almost free. And there are ways to get scholarships, ways to get these different opportunities. I will also say, I think to get a data scientist position without a master's degree coming from boot camp is dramatically harder than an analyst, but also harder than an engineering or like a data engineering or a software engineering position.
Yeah.
And so if people are angling to get into data science through one of those domains, it's something that like the types of positions people are applying to can vary dramatically. Again, I think your position is very interesting because you went through boot camp. The boot camp, you did learn some data there of, okay, these are the types of people that are getting hired, and this is what they have that I do not, which I find fascinating as well. I'd love for you to dive a little bit deeper into how you determined the program. So obviously, it was about the fit for where you could get into uh, based on your background. But were there other factors, or was it more, hey, this is the one that meets the criteria for me?
Um, I would say like so. I mean, part of me also always wanted to do an MBA. I don't know. It's just something I wanted to do. I was never sure if I would actually do it, but I felt like this would be an opportunity to have a balanced approach in terms of education that wasn't like purely technical, and so like it would give me a mix of like MBA education as well as like the science and technical aspect of the field I was trying to get into. So like that was one of the main reasons that I ended up choosing this program, and also just for marketability. Because while I was applying the roles, I had a marketability problem. Sure, I had some of the knowledge to be able to do the work, but that sometimes isn't enough. You have to present yourself in a way that catches someone's eye, so that you can potentially get the opportunity to perform in a role, right? So all of those things actually kind of meshed into the reason why I ended up choosing that specific degree.
I don't recommend anyone do this specifically, but this is something that quite a lot of people did in the master's degree I was doing. Is basically they sign up for the master's degree, they put on their resume, and the fact that they were enrolled in a master's program helped them with their job prospects. And then when they landed a job, they just quit the program, which again, I don't think is what I would personally do, but it is helping to solve that marketability problem for less than the cost of an entire degree. But again,
Sure.
not exactly how I would approach it. But realistically, not a terribly unsound approach in general. Is that okay? You're solving the one problem. If you think you're capable and qualified to work in these roles, even if you don't necessarily have the degree, you can use the pursuit of the degree to solve that marketability problem and move forward in that way.
Yeah.
Probably a little harder in like an MBA or a more full time degree. A lot of the guys and girls that I was in school with were doing their degree part time, and that they didn't seem to be quite as missed in the curriculum when it was built like that. What was the breaking point for you where you said, okay, what I'm doing is not working. Let's try this different approach of going back to school?
Um, I guess it was just more so when I like it was either continue or go back to what I was doing before, and I couldn't fathom continuing to do work for the rest of my life that I wasn't passionate about or at least interested in. And so that kind of like kept me from going back, and I just felt like I needed to find a different way. So like since sending resumes was not necessarily working, one of the only other areas or approaches that I knew of that gave some people results was the school thing. So, well, going back to school, and like first I was really against it because I already had a master's degree, but I mean, sometimes if you really want to go for something, you have to make some sacrifices. And so I went back, even though like I was in my previous master's degree was a 4 year master's degree, and so like most degrees are like 2 years, right? So having to stomach that and still go for another one, I felt like was the best choice. And so it was just mostly realizing that I didn't really want to go back to what I was doing before, and just trying to make a way for it to work.
I really like that. I mean, I think a lot about what the other alternatives are. For most people who are interested in pursuing data science or pursuing a domain like this, it's important to think about if this does not succeed, what are my other options? Often pushing through and finding another way or trying alternatives is a better option than to go back to doing what you were doing before that you didn't necessarily enjoy. The opportunity cost is also very interesting where you're learning something, that information stays with you. It's not a sunk cost to learn all this stuff. It's not like, oh, I paid, it's not like college tuition where I paid all this tuition and that money is gone. Uh, you're the time you spend accruing this knowledge, the knowledge stays with you regardless. And so even if you've already invested the time, you still have the dividends of the knowledge to continue to build on. It's not
Exactly.
like the knowledge goes away in the same way. And so you can continue to accrue and accrue knowledge. And it's not like the situation for you is ever getting worse because your knowledge base is continuing to grow. So I really like that you were able to find a way, even though it wasn't one that, oh, even though it was one that you really had to wrestle with overall.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So tell me about the internship. Tell me about how that turned into a full time role. Something that is a benefit of universities or more structured learning places is a lot of the time they give you an opportunity to get work experience, real work experience while still in school, and they also help you to find those opportunities. What did those look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, for my internship work, a lot of it was mostly so like some of it was learning certain languages like PySpark and becoming more proficient in Python, and just learning how to build specific data pipelines for maybe a specific piece of code in the recommender engine. So that was so in my company, my team actually. Well, we work with recommender systems, and so like it was my internship was just pretty much getting me exposed to that and understanding the type of work or effort that would be required to be able to fully build out full-fledged data products. And so I think one of the products I ended up building was it was a contest where we sent out offers to we sent out rewards to customers based off of when they purchased something within the store. So it ranged from anywhere from like $25 to $10,000. And so like it was just coming up with an algorithm or a way to randomly distribute all of that money to these specific customers. And there was like 12 million. So like just coming up with logic for that and becoming more comfortable with things like PySpark. And so, and then there was also the opportunity to like build like a mini A/B testing framework just to use to uh, like evaluate the performance of specific features that we might use for various engines within our team. So yeah, that those were the projects I ended up doing as an intern, and then I ended up performing well. I believe they mentioned that I was one of their first interns that was actually able to push things to production. So yeah, so based off of that, I performed well, and then they offered me like the full time data scientist role, and things went on from there.
Very cool. How did the school help you get connected with that company?
It was more so they just had a portal, like a job portal where our company basically posted um roles specifically for just Queens and maybe a few other universities, and then I ended up applying to that. And then based off of my experience, based off of my experience, they said that hey, they wanted to interview me and talk to me from there. And the thing about a lot of those roles is that they're not really posted as much on like the LinkedIn's and the public sites, and so they're specifically made for university students. So like in that aspect, that is an advantage you do have when you go to university. So
It's sort of a big fish in a small pond where you're competing against essentially only your peers for the role. I know, for example, when I was in grad school applying for consulting positions, if you went to a target school, the recruiters for the companies would come onto campus and they'd interview 20 students or something like that. And they were likely going to hire three or four of them. And you essentially had to beat 20 of your classmates compared to 1,500
yeah,
random people applying to the job online, which I think is interesting. It's a different way to approach it. On the other hand, if you're not a stronger student or your competition is really high in the classroom, it can be different. Or it also varies pretty aggressively by school. I mean, I've been to technically four different universities, and when I was at the University of Virginia, their employment stuff was dramatically better than the other universities that I was at. So that's something, if you are looking at schools, you should probably consider. Um, you know, you'd mentioned recommender systems in your job. Is that something you had experience with in school before, or was that pretty new to you? And how did you pick those up?
I mean, like I knew very surface level things, but I would say it probably was like a weakness in terms of my overall understanding of like the entire data science domain. So it was interesting that like my first role was directly related to just like using recommender systems, but it was intimidating at first. But like my team was very accommodating, and like they did a really great job of helping me understand like just how everything works, and so like I was able to understand, just our whole ecosystem in terms of how our recommenders work. So, like we have this, it's our recommenders like an ensemble recommender where there's a bunch of sub models or sub recommenders within it that offers to customers. And so, like, I think it was a really great opportunity there, and it just really helped round things out.
Awesome. So there's a lot of talk about LLMs and their capabilities in recommender systems. Are they still limited? Are we still, when would it be a good idea to use an LLM in a recommender system, and when would it not be?
Um, well, I guess when reproducibility is not an issue, that probably would be something that um, would be advantageous to use, because the problem is a lot of the times when you're building out full-fledged applications, there's also like the whole QA process and being able to test and continually reproduce results, right? So like if you ended up producing a recommendation that caused an error within your entire engine, and then you wanted to test it, it really would be hard because of the nature of how LLMs work. So yeah, that would be probably a disadvantage to using it. I think I think we're on the way to being able to use them at some point. I mean, like some people are already using LLMs for recommendations, right? When you build out a full fledged uh, vector database with based off of maybe a bunch of items or products, you can do a cosine similarity search to be able to see which item is the most similar to another item. And so, like in some ways, it's very useful. But I also am not an expert, so like there are some things I probably have to do some more research on because like it's still very emerging and still there's still a lot of things happening. But I do think we're well on our way if we're not on our way there already in terms of using LLMs to do a recommender system recommendations.
Yeah, in the episode of Kensington's Neighbors with Greg Camrad, we talked quite a bit about LangChain and using how they're using vector databases for the similarity search there. I think that that's a pretty good use case. Not necessarily recommender systems, but there are practical implications and practical use cases for a framework like that. Inevitably, it does turn into recommender systems or it could be leveraged into recommender systems. I'm still not sure of the specific use cases that would be most practical for that, but I agree. I think we're getting closer. The reproducibility and the stability are some issues we're going to have to face here.
Right.
One thing I was interested in about your work is, you spent a lot of time in this divinity degree. Are there things that you use from that experience in your data work at all? Is there any crossover? Is there any lessons that you're pulling? What is there a story there?
Yeah. Okay. So with this, it's very interesting. So right now, my specific, like with the specific work I do, I don't think there isn't much overlap, but there is within. I found there is within the whole data science domain in general. So like, I ended up learning like a lot of. I spent a lot of time learning different languages in my divinity degree. So like, I learned like how to read and read and write in Greek and then also Hebrew as well. And so like it gave me a really interesting understanding of just how human languages work and just like understanding like various different concepts in terms of just like the semantics of words, the morphologies, graphologies, what a lexeme is, what a morpheme is, all of these various linguistic tools that are used to just interpret language. And I always thought there would be like a lot of overlap between that and just natural language processing. So being able to take those linguistic concepts and map them towards NLP, I feel like would be a very interesting use case. So that's something I'm excited for. I think at some point I will get an opportunity to work in to work on something more related like that. So because NLP is like pretty much everywhere. Even in my team, we use NLP for search to basically set recommendations based off of what people search on the website. So yeah, I do believe there is some overlap in terms of what I learned within the divinity space and also within the data science domain. So I am looking forward to when that opportunity finally comes. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's probably things you don't even realize that do overlap. I read this book a while ago called Range by David Epstein, and he talks about how people with different backgrounds, people who've studied fundamentally different fields, they start to see threads or opportunities in new domains that people who've been working in those domains for a long time don't naturally see, just because you're looking at it from a different perspective, from a different background, from different constructs. So there's a chance some of the brilliant work that you do is from having a different perspective as well, and that really does pay dividends. I felt very validated by reading that book because my background is from all over the place, but that I really I just find the cross training and the referencing and learning different things such an interesting philosophical, I guess, like difference over time. Um, so something I wanted to also touch on is you'd posed a question to me about certificates and about data science YouTubers.
Mhm.
You'd asked me are data science YouTubers, are they dishonest in their advice sometimes? Do you want to give some context for a question like that?
Well, I guess it was coming from the fact that I guess it was coming from my anecdotal experience, right? More so because I was doing a lot of the things that YouTubers were saying, doing all of the courses, doing a lot of self learning, and just seeing that I wasn't getting any of the results that a lot of them said you could easily get. Was making me realize that maybe because the thing is a lot I saw some YouTubers they discredited getting a university degree. So like initially I was just like there's no way I'm going to get one. But then later I realized that maybe hey, that might be like a valid approach. And so like everybody wants to hear that you don't need to go to school to get your dream job. That's what ideally me and you would want to hear. But in reality, sometimes you do have to study. You have to put in the hours, your 10,000 hours to fully be able to get the expertise to be proficient in whatever you want to do. And so, like, I felt like, I don't know, I felt like maybe they weren't being fully honest, but it depends. Everybody's story is different, right? So that's kind of where it came from. But
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head where you said everyone's story is different. Is that I would hope every person on YouTube, everyone creating content is speaking from their own experience. I mean, something that I realized is my experiences personally are limited. So I've worked at 3 or 4 companies now, and 4 companies is a very small sample of the total different companies. My life experience is a very small sample of all the data science life experience. And so one of the ways that I try to mitigate that or try to get around that is by doing podcasts, interviewing people, talking and learning from their experiences. And so I think in some sense, from what I've seen from all these different domains, the only consistent way to get in, or the only trend that I found in getting into data science is that there is no trend. Everyone that I've seen has gotten into the domain in slightly different ways. I will say that I've definitely seen quite a few people land data science jobs without advanced degrees, but at the same time, I wouldn't say that there's been very few people that have landed data science jobs easily. It's not something that happens without a ton of work.
right.
And depending on anyone's situation, there isn't a specific right or wrong way. Like, going to school for me, through my experience, it did work for me. I've, I have 2 master's degrees. I went way down the other route, but I also have friends that, I've at least one friend that doesn't even have a college degree. They landed a data analyst job and was able to work his way up through the ranks. So to me, there's only exceptions. There isn't a rule. But at the same time, as I mentioned, I don't know if the YouTubers are necessarily being dishonest.
Mhm.
I think, again, they're speaking from their own experience. Maybe, if anything, they're saying it's easier than it is, which is a form of dishonesty as well. But at the same time, maybe it was easy for them when they were in a different, coming from a different background or coming from in a different climate where everyone was hiring data scientists. I mean, when I was applying for jobs, this was, almost what, 7 years ago, when I was getting into data science and landing roles. There was a lot more demand for the skill set that I had. And now I wouldn't say the market's saturated, but there's a lot more people applying for positions. So
Mhm.
it could also be that advice changes over time, and maybe they're not necessarily up to date with what's happening currently in the market. So hopefully people aren't out to to just farm views and say compelling things,
Yeah.
but at the same time, there is some I think some, maybe not dishonesty, but lack of complete research that's out there, or lack of generalizability of a lot of the videos. So that also, we talked offline about certificates and the value of those and those types of things. I don't think certificates, the actual certificate itself, means anything,
Mhm.
but the idea that you're learning something, that knowledge in and of itself is worth something. So it could be the same way with these data science YouTubers, where some of what they're saying is valuable, but part of it is something you should just throw away, just like the actual certificate part of the certificates.
Definitely.
Amazing. Emmanuel, those are all the questions I had. Do you have any final thoughts you wanted to pass on? How can people learn more about you, or maybe reach out to you if they're interested?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if anybody's interested, I'm on LinkedIn. So if you type in LinkedIn/in/Immanuel Tacky, you can find me there. And then yeah,
Perfect.
I'm always open to talk to anybody who's aspiring to break into the industry because I know how difficult it can be. And so like yeah, if you have any questions for advice, tips, I'll definitely try my best to respond. And yeah,
Amazing. I will also link that in the description and in the show notes of the video. So thank you again so much for coming on. And it was a pleasure speaking with you.
likewise, Kev. Likewise, Ken. It's been a pleasure speaking to you as well and being on the podcast. Thank you so much for having me here.